5 missiles. That is the numbers the Soviet warning system showed just after midnight on the 26th September 1983. In the next few minutes, you will see exactly what Stanislav Petrov actually did, what he did not do, and why one report from Serpukhov 15 mattered inside a nuclear chain of command, not a movie version, the real one. The room was sealed, dry, and too warm. Red lights pulsed against gray walls. A siren kept cutting through the air. If you had only minutes to report an American nuclear strike, would you trust the machine or trust the silence beyond it? That question does not belong safely in the Cold War. It belongs anywhere a system asks a human being to decide before the facts arrive. Petrov did not have a launch button. He did not sit alone above the world with one hand over the end of history. His job was narrower than that, and because it was narrower, it was more dangerous in a different way. He was the duty officer at serpukhov 15, responsible for judging data from the OKO early warning satellites and passing an assessment up the line. That assessment would shape what senior commanders believed was happening. In command, this matters. The first description of reality often weighs more than the final order. The phone in his hand was hard and cold. Sweat gathered under his collar. Printers and displays kept spitting out the same message. He was not deciding whether to fire. He was deciding what the Soviet system would think it was seeing. September 1983 was already poisoned. On the 1st of September, Soviet forces shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after it strayed into Soviet airspace. 269 people were killed. The diplomatic air turned metallic after that. Every signal was read through fear. Every silence felt deliberate. Yuri Andropov was ill and deeply suspicious of American intentions. NATO exercises were watched with a sharpened gaze. In that climate, a technical warning was never just technical. It entered a political nervous system already shaking. You can hear the paper sliding from a fax machine, smell stale tobacco, caught in uniforms and curtains. See maps covered in symbols no civilian was meant to read. This is why one false alarm on one autumn night could not be treated as a harmless machine error. Not then. The place was Serpukhov 15, a secret command center south of Moscow, built to watch the sky before the radar horizon could. Men there did not see bombers, oceans, or missile silos. They saw signals. Bright marks on screens. Timings, confidence levels. A machine's version of reality. The OKO satellite system was supposed to give the Soviet Union precious extra minutes by detecting the hot plume of an American missile launch. But OKO was still young. New systems carry the smell of ambition and unfinished work at the same time. The room hummed with fans and relays. CRT screens cast a blue-gray wash across tired faces. Here is the cruelty of command in such a place. You must translate uncertain data into language strong enough for generals before certainty itself exists. In 1983, the Soviet early warning network was not finished. That is the part many retellings skip, and it changes everything. OKO could see first. Ground radar could confirm later once a missile climbed far enough and crossed the radar horizon. Between those two moments lay a gap, a narrow one, but wide enough to hold panic, doctrine, and human error all at once. Inside that gap, command had to guess before proof arrived. The clock on the wall did not tick loudly, but men heard it anyway. The air conditioning made the room cold while the skin under a uniform stayed damp. This is where Petrov's judgment lived, not above the system. Inside a system that demanded an answer before the evidence could become whole. What would you call reliable in a room like that? Then it began. Just after midnight, Moscow time, on the 26th of September 1983, OKO reported a launch from the United States. One missile. The alarm cut through the room like torn sheet metal. Red indicators flashed. Men turned toward Petrov because there was nowhere else to look. A single warning could be a malfunction. It could also be the first clean edge of catastrophe. No one in that room had the luxury of distance. Their world was the screen, the phone, and the next few seconds. Petrov looked at the display, then at the officers around him, then back again. The room had that electric smell old equipment gives off when it has been running too long. You could almost hear people trying not to breathe too loudly. One launch, that was all. For the moment, then the number changed. Not 2, not a flood. 5, the system now showed 5 American missiles inbound. This is the answer promised at the start, and it made the situation worse, not clearer. 5 was too many to dismiss with a shrug. But it was also too few to fit the logic of a full American first strike. That contradiction sat in Petrov's hands like hot metal. Around him, shoes struck the hard floor in quick bursts. Someone repeated the alert. Someone else waited for him to classify it. Your mouth goes dry in moments like that. Words become physical. You feel them before you say them. What would you do when the number is large enough to trigger fear, but still wrong enough to resist belief? There was no good option left in the room. Petrov's reasoning was not mystical. It was military. In later interviews, he said the pattern did make sense. If the United States were launching a real nuclear first strike, why send only 5 missiles? Why begin the end of the world with a gesture too small for the purpose? He had another reason to hesitate. Ground radar had not confirmed the attack. That mattered. He did not know the warning was false. He knew only that the evidence was incomplete. That difference is the whole weight of command. The metal edge of the console felt cold under his palm. He kept shifting his eyes from the display to the telephone, from the telephone to the men waiting beside him. In the background, breathing became audible. Not panic yet, something tighter. A room holding itself together by discipline alone. Picture it slowly. A board glows with the word chunch. The siren does not stop. A young officer stands rigid near the console, afraid that movement itself might be mistaken for indecision. Another waits with a message pad already damp in his hand. No one speaks above a low voice because shouting would not help the machine and would not help the truth. Petrov has to label the event. Real attack or false alarm. That label will travel upward through the Soviet command chain faster than doubt can. There is no hero shot here. No swelling music. Just dust in the vents, red light on tired skin, and the stale smell of electronics. This is what command often is at its most dangerous. Not power, but the burden of naming reality before reality has finished arriving. This is where the legend needs trimming. Petrov did not single-handedly stop a launch with one dramatic refusal. Researchers such as Pavel Podvig have pointed out that the Soviet system still required higher review, other channels, and political authority beyond one duty officer. W.J. Hennigan and others have made the same correction. The line, "The man who saved the world," carries a truth, but it also carries distortion. Yet the correction does not make the night small. It makes it precise. In layered command systems, the first report can tilt the whole structure. If the first report is confident, fear climbs quickly. If it is cautious, time survives a little longer. The phone line trembled faintly in its cradle. Paper tightened in a sweating hand. Then came the question from above, and Petrov had to answer without certainty. What Petrov actually did was more ordinary, and therefore more frightening. He made a judgment call under Sk's uncertainty and reported the warning as unreliable, not impossible, not harmless, unreliable. That word matters. Military systems teach obedience to signal, but real command sometimes demands resistance to premature certainty. Petrov said he had a civilian education as an engineer, and that may have shaped the way he distrusted a machine asking for blind faith. He was also not fully reassured. He waited to be proven wrong by impact. Imagine that wait. The room still humming. The siren gone or fading, but not from the body, the back of the neck wet. Eyes on the clock. Eyes on the radar that still showed nothing. You choose, and then you must live inside the silence that follows the choice. Later investigation pointed to a cruel technical cause. Space Oko's satellites had likely mistaken sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for the heat signature of missile launches. A flaw in geometry. A trap made of angle, orbit, and light. Not sabotage, not genius. Just the sky producing a lie that the machine was ready to believe. That is almost harder to accept. We like catastrophe to come from villains. Sometimes it comes from design pushed beyond its maturity. The cold outside over Soviet territory meant nothing in that room. The equipment still threw off a dry, stale warmth. Somewhere above the earth, a sensor watched sunlight and called it fire. If you build a command system that must move before full confirmation, then even dawn on cloud can become an enemy. That is not drama. That is systems failure with a human face. Petrov was right that night. That did not make him comfortable, celebrated, or immediately rewarded. Accounts differ in detail, but the broad picture is clear. He was not treated as a man institutions enjoy. He had exposed weakness in a prestigious system. Command structures need reliable judgment, but they also resent reminders that the machine can fail. He later described the strain plainly. The pressure stayed in the body. It had to. Try to imagine going home after that shift. Morning light on concrete. Air that feels almost too cool after the sealed room. Tea or tobacco in a kitchen that looks ordinary again. And knowing that, for a stretch of minutes, the world reduced itself to your voice on a telephone. Would you trust a system more after surviving it once? Or less? The lesson is not that one brave man can always save everyone. That is too easy, and history is rarely that kind. The harder lesson is that command often rests on people forced to judge partial truth under institutional pressure. Today, the screens are newer. The interfaces are cleaner. The warning loops are faster. But the old problem remains. A human being still has to decide what a signal means before the consequences finish unfolding. In war rooms, hospitals, power grids, air defense centers, the same architecture returns. Machine confidence, human doubt, little time. The skin-tight feeling across the shoulders. The low mechanical hum. The temptation to let procedure think for you. Petrov's night matters because it was not supernatural. It was administrative, technical, and deeply human. That is what makes it dangerous enough to survive into your century. The record keeps this. Just after midnight at Serpukhov 15, the Oko system reported launches that may have meant the end. It also keeps the recent wound in the room. Only weeks earlier, Korean Airlines Flight 07 had been shot down, and trust was already thin. But the record does not keep this, whose throat went dry when the siren started. It does not keep how cold the console light looked, or how long a second feels when you suspect your own system may be lying. That is the ledger of command. Place, warning, chain of reporting, and beneath it the part no archive can fully hold. The texture of hesitation, the discipline not to panic. The private cost of telling superiors that the machine may be wrong when the machine sounds certain. 5 missiles. That was the number on the screen, not the end of the world, not nothing. A number large enough to force a judgment and small enough to reveal a flaw. Stanislav Petrov did not perform a miracle. He did something harder to copy. He remained uncertain at the exact moment the system demanded certainty from him. That restraint bought time, and time let truth catch up. The room was still hot. The lights were still red. The chain of command was still real. But one man refused to confuse alarm with proof. There is a reason that decision still feels close. Systems will keep asking human beings to move before they know enough. If you had Petrov's phone in your hand, with 5 missiles on the screen and no radar confirmation yet, what would you tell the men above you?